Samuel Beckett was born 90 years ago on Good Friday at Foxrock near Dublin. He died during the Christmas of 1989 in Paris, where he'd lived for over 50 years. In his lifetime as both playwright and novelist, he was idolised, analysed, celebrated and dissected for every last drop of meaning, and at the same time often pilloried for his pessimism and attacked for his obscurity. But nearly 7 years after his death, is it possible to assess the exact nature of his achievement? Did his genius lie in his plays, which seemed to redefine the boundaries of drama and show how much the form could do without? In works, for instance, like Waiting for Godot, in which two tramps stoically await the arrival of a figure who may give meaning and definition to their lives, or in Endgame, with its confined vision of mankind in its terminal stages, or Happy Days, in which the heroine, buried up to her waist and neck, retains her obstinate cheerfulness. Or will posterity perhaps come to value more highly Beckett's novels and prose narratives, beginning with Murphy, a highly entertaining evocation of London life owing something to James Joyce, and continuing with the trilogy of Malloy, Malone Dies and The Unnameable, interior monologues filled with a last-ditch black humour. And although Beckett wrote most of his major works initially in French, was he throughout his career a definably Irish writer? Well, to address these and other questions, I've got with me 4 people who in different ways know Beckett and his work intimately. Professor James Knowlson of Reading University, who this autumn publishes a major new biography of Beckett entitled Damned to Fame. Then I have with me the New York theatre critic Mel Gussow, who's just published a new book called Conversations with and About Beckett. Down the line from Dublin, we have the Irish actor Barry McGovern, whose much-travelled solo show about Beckett called I'll Go On captures the courage and humour that pervaded his work. And down another line from Suffolk we have actress Billy Whitelaw, who became one of Beckett's most famous interpreters, working very closely with him, particularly on the productions of Footfalls and Not I. Barry McGovern, can I just come to you first? I mean, for anyone who'd never seen a Beckett play, who'd never read a Beckett work, could you just give me some sort of graphic description of his universe, of what his plays deal with, for example?
But essentially, they are about people trying to go on in the universe. He uses the word on all the time. It's about people in situations, whether in Waiting for Godot, you've got 2 people waiting for this person who may or may not come. In Endgame, you've got Ham waiting for the end, Clove waiting to leave. It's about leaving. In play, you've got a situation where there's 3 people in urns, this incredible visual image of a spotlight probing the man and his wife and his mistress, now dead in another world, and the story, which is terrifying on one level and fantastically funny on another level. You've got these 3 monologues intercut, and it's a very, very funny play. It's really about survival at the edge and getting through no matter what. But the one thing that gets you through above all else is a gritty determination and great humour.
Survival at the edge. Mel Gussow, how would you sum up in a phrase or two the Beckett world?
The plays are very, very different. And each one has at least one very, very strong image. So, for example, in Waiting for Godot, the image of 2 men, a tree, on this bare plain. Where are they? What are they waiting for? What are they doing? Immediately the questions arise in the audience's mind, and they're never answered, which is, of course, one of Beckett's very basic points. He doesn't provide the answers. He leaves it to you to wonder what next.
They're about a whole range of human themes, but above all human needs. Now, we've had the description of what they look like, and as Mel says, we could continue that with Happy Days, where the big question is, what is she doing there in the earth, up to her waist and then up to her neck? And that is, of course, made into an element, what are you meant to mean as well, dressed up with your shopping bag, etc., etc. So the whole question of meaning, but with Beckett, you have all the grand philosophical themes are woven in, but it's not that it's philosophy with a kind of theatrical top-dressing of fertilizer, theatrical fertilizer being put onto it. It's that the themes are actually there in terms of human need to discover where the self is and what is the relationship between an individual self and his past. So memory plays a tremendously important part. What are these memories that keep coming back to this figure who is just there as a head on the stage, with voices coming from 3 different parts of the stage. These images are themselves haunting. You may not like them, but they will haunt you or stay with you until the grave. And I think that from the point of view of the drama, that he was at once a radical innovator, testing the possibilities of the stage. There's one query on one of our manuscripts in the Beckett archive in Reading which says, less means more. And I think that that's one sort of answer to the drama point, basically.
But you stress the lessness of Beckett, as it were, and the radical innovation. Mel Gusso, do you agree with that that is where Beckett's genius does lie?
Well, it certainly does, but I think we also have to talk about his humor. And I always remember a classic line of his referring to the uproarious pessimism in his work. And I think that strikes a note because at the same time, it truly is the combination of tragedy and comedy, which others have claimed, but Beckett owned. And I think that one feels that in the novels as well as the plays. And I think, as Jim said before, that it is a body of work. The body of work is Beckett. It's really hard to say which rates higher over a long period of years. I think they're certainly of an equal scale.
So he redefines drama, you're both saying, and works through incredibly haunting, powerful images and through this uproarious pessimism. Can we talk a bit about how actors interpret Beckett? I should explain there was a great row in Britain a couple of years ago when a production of Beckett's Footfalls was restaged by a director called Deborah Warner. Now, in the original play, Beckett specifies very exactly where the character should move, how many steps she should take up and down the length of the stage. And this production by Deborah Warner redefined the play and had the actress roaming around the circle and the stalls. Now, Billy Whitelaw, you've played Footfalls memorably. Does Beckett allow any latitude for the actor, for the performer, for the interpreter of the work, or do you have to strictly follow the instructions?
Well, I think if you don't follow his instructions, you're a damn fool, because he is has a quite remarkable imagination. And I've had this thrown at me on many occasions, and I equate it to a ballet dancer. I mean, you would not say Nureyev or Dame Margot Fonteyn because they were following out someone's choreography or putting down their toes to a certain beat of music, that they were just pawns in someone else's hand. You do have something to offer, but Beckett did know what he was after, and I think you have to have faith in that and go with it, because I really do believe the man is a genius.
Can I bring in Barry McGovern, who's in Dublin and who's worked a lot in Beckett plays and, as I said, has his own solo show, which takes its title from the last words of Beckett's novel, The Unnameable. Barry, do you find as a performer that there is freedom, there is latitude, particularly when you're doing your own show?
Well, I mean, I think we should not talk about the one-man show because that's based on the novels, so therefore there's no precedent for that. Beckett, it's not a Beckett play. It's an adaptation which Beckett agreed to from the novels. But I've done Waiting for Godot, I've done Endgame, Happy Days, Krapp's Last Tape, and I think there's enormous freedom. Every production of a Beckett play, if it's done properly, will be very, very different. Every actress playing Winnie, every man playing Ham or Pozzo or Vladimir or whoever, they all bring different things to bear on it. Even Beckett himself, he directed Krapp's Last Tape 4 times, and each production was very different. I think playing Beckett is like playing a piece of music. It's like playing a score, and you deviate from those notes at your peril.
We seem to be agreeing there's a sort of freedom within discipline and within those restrictions. Can I bring us on to another topic, which is Beckett's Irishness and how vital that is to the interpretation and the performance of Beckett particularly? And Barry McGovern, since you're indisputably Irish, could you tell us a bit about this and how much it influences your one-man show? And perhaps you would give us some example of the musicality of Beckett's prose.
Certainly. Beckett was obviously an Irishman. His roots were Irish and so on, although he spent perhaps the greater part of his life in France. But I think Beckett is such a universal writer. I think it would be a crying shame for anybody to be claiming him as their own. He is as real to perhaps a Korean or a Portuguese as he is to an Irish person. Of course, in the essential details, there are elements of the flavour that we would understand, local idiom, syntax, place names and so on, even thinly veiled references to Irish places and thickly veiled, indeed, references to Irish places in certain novels and plays. But he's such a unique, universal writer that I think it would be a shame for Irish people to claim as their own. Having said all that, the syntax, for instance, of Waiting for Godot is particularly Irish. the syntax of a lot of his plays, the phrases he uses. I mean, I recognise them. I was born a Southsider in Dublin, just as he was, just virtually down the road from where he was born and grew up. I know the areas. There is a certain feel to the whole, say, Malloy, that novel, which is very much the South County Dublin where both he and I grew up.
Could we hear an extract, perhaps, which would illustrate what you're talking about?
Well, I was going to do an extract from The Unnameable, which isn't necessarily very Irish, but I'll give it to you anyway. It's towards the end of The Unnameable. They love each other, marry in order to love each other better, more conveniently. He goes to the wars, he dies at the wars. She weeps with emotion at having loved him, at having lost him. Yep. Marries again, in order to love again, more conveniently again. They love each other. You love as many times as necessary in order to be happy. He comes back. The other comes back from the wars. He didn't die at the wars after all. She goes to the station to meet him. He dies in the train of emotion at the thought of seeing her again, having her again. She weeps again, with emotion again, at having lost him again. Yep. Goes back to the house. He's dead. The other is dead. The mother-in-law takes him down. He hanged himself with emotion at the thought of losing her. She weeps louder at having loved him, at having lost him. There's a story for you. That was to teach me the nature of emotion. That's called emotion. What emotion can do, given favourable conditions. What love can do. Well, so that's emotion. That's love. And trains, the nature of trains, and the meaning of your back to the engine, and guards, stations, platforms, wars, love, heart-rending cries. That must be the mother-in-law. Her cries rend the heart as she takes down her son, or her son-in-law, I don't know. It must be her son, since she cries. And the door, the house door's bolted. When she got back from the station, she found the house door bolted. Who bolted it? He the better to hang himself, or the mother-in-law the better to take him down, or to prevent her daughter-in-law from re-entering the premises? There's a story for you. It must be the daughter-in-law. It isn't the son-in-law and the daughter. It's the daughter-in-law and the son. How I reasoned, to be sure, this evening. It was to teach me how to reason. It was to tempt me to go to the place where you can come to an end. I must have been a good pupil up to a point. I couldn't get beyond a certain point. I can understand their annoyance. This evening I begin to understand. Oh, there's no danger. It's not I. It wasn't I. The door. It's the door interests me. A wooden door. Who bolted the door and for what purpose? I'll never know. There's a story for you. I thought they were over. Perhaps it's a new one, leaping fresh. Is it the return to the world of fable? No, just a reminder to make me regret what I've lost. Long to be again in the place I was banished from. Unfortunately, it doesn't remind me of anything. All the words they showed me, all those I remember, I need them all to be able to go on. It's a lie. A score would be plenty. Tried and trusty, unforgettable, nicely varied. That would be palate enough. I'd mix them, I'd vary them. That would be gamut enough. All the things I do if I could, if I wished, if I could wish. No need to wish. That's how it'll end. In heart-rending cries, inarticulate murmurs, to be invented as I go along, improvised as I groan along. I laugh. That's how it'll end. In a chuckle. Chuck, chuck, ow, ha, pa. I'll practice. Nyum, hoo, plop, psst. Nothing but emotion. Bing, bang. That's blows. Ugh, poo. What else? Ooh, ah. That's love. Enough. It's tiring. Hee hee. That's the abderite. No, the other. In the end. Is the end. The ending end. Is the silence. A few gurgles in the silence. The real silence. Perhaps it's a dream. All a dream. That would surprise me. I'll wake in the silence and never sleep again. It would be I. Or dream. Dream again. Dream of a silence. A dream silence. Full of murmurs. I don't know. That's all words. Never wake. All words. There's nothing else. You must go on. That's all I know. They're going to stop. I know that well. I can feel it. They're going to abandon me. It'll be the silence. For a moment. A good few moments. Or it'll be mine. The lasting one. That didn't last. That still lasts. It will be I. You must go on. I can't go on. You must go on. I'll go on. You must say words as long as there are any. Until they find me. Until they say me. Strange pain. Strange sin. You must go on. Perhaps it's done already. Perhaps they've said me already. Perhaps they've carried me to the threshold of my story. Before the door that opens on my story. That would surprise me. If it opens. It will be I. It'll be the silence. Where I am. I don't know. I'll never know. In the silence you don't know. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on.
Pause for breath there, I think, Barry. That was wonderful. But what is fascinating is that mixture of hurtling comedy and desperation combined in that magnificent passage.
Yeah, well, the Unnameable is full of that. It's a very difficult novel, but coming after Malloy and Malone Dies, which are much more normal, if you put that in inverted commas, the Unnameable hurtles towards this end, which has this great mixture of black comedy in the midst of almost despair.
It was wonderfully done. Anyway, Billy Whitelaw, can I turn to you and talk about similar matters? I mean, is there within Beckett, and you've done several of the plays and the monologues, does Beckett require great variations of tone and style? In other words, furious tempo like the one Barry McGovern has just demonstrated, and also much graver, slower passages?
Yes, it does. And I was very interested when you were talking earlier on about the Irishness of Beckett, and Barry saying, well, no, it is universal. But I have found that whenever I have read to myself and rehearsed any of Beckett, I've either had to do it in my own North Country accent, which is my basic North of England accent, or I've read it with as near as I could with his Irish accent. This is in my head. And when I did Not I actually did it with a slight North Country accent, because it would be almost impossible to do it with, and certainly a few years ago, what was known as sort of the received speech. I mean, that rather sort of strangled sound that actors used to have many years ago. Because his music is fuller and richer than that.
I should explain, obviously, to those who've never seen Not I, that what the play shows us is a mouth speaking for 15 minutes, and what we see is this mouth in extraordinary close-up, isn't it? This mobile motor mouth. Billy, is it possible for you to just give us a taste of that, as it were?
Yes,
literally?
I will. That goes at speed. I won't do as much as Barry has just done. I mean, one, A, I'm sort of full of hay fever, and B, I think Barry's already sort of given that indication of Beckett at speed. And I've also got and written some of his notes down here of when we did Rockabye, which is the other end of the scale and going very slowly. But let me just do a bit of the mouth in Not I. And as I say, I do that with my own hint of North Country, which is, okay, it goes... out into this world, tiny little thing before its time, and I got for, what, girl, yes, tiny little girl, out into this, before her time, God-forsaken hole, called, no matter, parents unknown, unheard of, he having vanished, thin air, no sooner buttoned up his breeches, she similarly 8 months later, almost at the tick, so no love spared that, no love such as normally vented on the speechless infant in the home, no, nor indeed for that matter, no love of any kind, and this subsequent kind, so, typical affair, nothing of any note till coming up to 60, when... What? 70? God! When I did it, I likened it also to driving a fast racing car around Brands Hatch, and the changes of pitch were like changing gear. And suddenly you go sort of like boom, 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 boom. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. I can hear you changing gear even as you talk. We've all four of you have been talking very knowledgeably and enthusiastically about Beckett, but of course there are those who cannot take Beckett, aren't there? Who find his work too deterministic. In other words, they argue that he posits a purposeless world in which all we can hope to do is exist with fortitude and dignity, but that he denies the possibility of change or improvement. Jim Nelson, what do you say to the anti-Beckett school?
Well, I don't believe this arch-miserablist at all. I don't think that was either the man, nor do I find it in the work. I thought that the recent production at the Donmar Warehouse
in London
of Endgame was a good illustration. The night I was there, which was the first night, everybody was laughing, that there was a lot of humour, and it isn't enough to call it gallows humour. It's very often the humour of the here and now. It's the moment, it's the precise physical here and now. But I find that the humour is, in a sense, comforting. Comforting because if you really can face up to the worst, and let's face it, there are few of us who don't have to face the worst at some time in our lives, that and come out still with a kind of, as Mel said, uproarious pessimism, that it is something there which I find, in a sense, has almost a moral quality to it.
Mel, you come from a country, America, don't you, where the whole ethos of the society is based on optimism, it seems to me, and the possibility of changing your life in the future. I can't ask you to speak for the whole of America and the American nation, but, how does America generally receive Beckett, or those who go to theatre? Do they understand his philosophy, this mixture of pessimism and stoicism and comedy, which Jim was talking about?
Well, truthfully, I don't think America receives Beckett enough, that his work is done, but it's not done in the great quantity that it should be. And just to go back one little point, I wouldn't want to make a case for Beckett having been an optimist, but I think there's something perhaps between being an optimist and a pessimist, something along the order of survivalist, that he believed in life, in the duration, in the extension of life. And I think that comes across, certainly to me and to anyone who's listening seriously to his plays. And to those in America or elsewhere who don't get Beckett, so to speak, all I have to say is listen again. Try harder, as Beckett would say, and try and try once more.
I'd just like to come in very briefly on that and just pick up this fact that Beckett, as a man, and I think this applies equally to the plays, that there is this resilience which, it's a kind of humour in adversity. And it happened, I've just written, as you know, Samuel Beckett's biography, and throughout his life you constantly see that humour was his automatic reflex response, and it is something to do with persisting, with continuing. On, Winnie. She does go on, and she goes on even though we all know. There's a line in All That Fall where he says, "Are you going in my direction, Mr. Roney?" And the answer is, we all are. We're all going in that direction. It's just a matter of time. So if you can actually face up to that and laugh. I mean, even Beckett, as a man, even sort of in the last few months of his life when I used to visit him in the old people's home, he would make a joke about getting up. "Hang on a minute, Jim. Hang on a minute. Getting up isn't as easy as that, you know," as he took his time over it. It's there in the work, and it's kind of like a tone deafness, I think, or a determination to filter out unhappiness. It's the mirthless laugh in Beckett that doesn't pretend that life can't often be a grim affair. But it makes the best of it and does something with it. But it's not optimism, no, of course not.
But you talk about facing up to the worst, and Mel Gusser, you talk about survivalism. Billy Whitelaw, you worked with Beckett very, very closely over long periods. I mean, did you find these same qualities they've both spoken about?
Yes, I thought he had a marvellous sort of ironical sense of humour, in which he would just throw his eyes up and say, "Oh, Lord." I mean, Samuel Beckett laughing is not someone throwing his head back and roaring with laughter. It's those pale, transparent blue eyes just raising themselves up to heaven, and usually an "Oh, Lord," and that lovely smile on his face. Do you recognise that, gentlemen?
They obviously do. But what is interesting is this paradox or contradiction. I mean, you all talk of his fortitude, humour and everything else, and yet I remember someone saying, Barry McGovern, that Beckett was the poet of terminal stages, and you proved that with the extract you read, didn't you? That there is this fascination, isn't there, with last moments, with endings. Is that right?
Last ditches, yeah.
Last ditches, yes.
But I was just thinking when you were talking there about Vladimir's last speech in Waiting for Godot, which to me, in a way, sums up this marvellous... I mean, Estragon is more or less given up, but Vladimir is the great optimistic pessimist, if I can put it that way. Was I sleeping while the others suffered? Am I sleeping now? Tomorrow, when I wake, or think I do, what shall I say of today? That with Estragon, my friend, at this place until the fall of night, I waited for Godot? That Pozzo passed with his carrier and that he spoke to us? Probably. But in all that, what truth will there be? He'll know nothing. He'll tell me about the blows he received, and I'll give him a carrot. Astride of a grave and a difficult birth. Down in the hole, lingeringly, the gravedigger puts on the forceps. We have time to grow old. The air is full of our cries. But habit is a great deadener. At me, too, someone is looking. Of me, too, someone is saying, he is sleeping. He knows nothing. Let him sleep on. I can't go on. What have I said? So there we have the last speech of Vladimir, which really, in a way, sums up to me not only the situation in Waiting for Godot, but the situation in Beckett's work as a whole, because in a way, he wrote the same piece many, many times, but it's so many variations on the essential universal theme.
What also came across to me, yes, in that passage, Barry, was the melody of the style. But I'd like to pick up another point. Obviously, we all agree Beckett was a singular and amazing writer and personality, but I'd like to ask you what influence you think he may have had on the course of drama. Mel Gusser, I mean, is there a visible school of Beckett writers, do you think?
Well, I would say he was not only the most important dramatist of our time, but the most influential. And the immediate people who were influenced by it are ones that we know, such as Edward Albee and Harold Pinter and Tom Stoppard. But it goes on well past that into David Mamet, Sam Shepard, young American writers today like Mac Wellman and Eric Overmyer. his impact is immeasurable. That people finally realized, playwrights realized, they did not have to have a beginning and a middle and an end to a play. They could just have a long middle if they felt like it. They could just have images and not words. That it was a great breakthrough in its time, and playwrights are influenced every day by Samuel Beckett.
Jim Nelson?
Yes, I'd like to go back to something we started with, really. That is music and painting, because he managed to kind of incorporate all of this, including sculpture as well, almost. If you think of the figure in May in Footfalls, I think that he managed to encapsulate something which has kind of not gone on in terms of any school, although, of course, those particular writers, and one could throw in a few more like David Mamet and many others. But I think that writers have felt that they had to kind of, in a sense, get rid of his influence. I think it's as marked as that sometimes, that people have to find their own voice. Beckett could never write a sentence that wasn't musical, and that the great stylist has influenced so many people in terms of the fiction as well as the drama. And I think that as a stylist, he's been of tremendous importance, mixing comedy and this deep, searing humour with these philosophical concerns. I mean, just one quick comment, just one sentence on this, that the passage that Barry read, the professors, of which I'm one, would or could comment that and point out that this has a lot of Descartes and considers the difference between sleeping and waking and how do you know when you're doing one or the other. It has all the brevity of life, which is put into a nutshell, but it also has that kind of persistence, that determination to go on, all expressed memorably. We're never going to forget Born Astride of a Grave.
No. You talked a lot about melody. We talked about the way Beckett incorporated, as it were, musical rhythms and patterns into his prose. We've talked about painting and the influence that had on his work. Billy Whitelaw, I wonder, did you feel that very strongly as a performer, that you were often being actually employed, as it were, as a figure in a living canvas in Beckett's work?
I felt when working with him as a director, he was both director and writer, that we were participating in a new art form. It wasn't just director, actor. He was painting with light. He was using my body like a sculptor will chip away at a piece of marble or muck about with a bit of clay or plasticine. He was conducting me like a conductor, doing jazz, or we'll talk about quartets. They can be jazz quartets. Some of this stuff is very like jazz. I remember a jazz musician once came into my room at the Royal Court and just said, "I was blowing every note with you, baby." It was a man called Zoot Zims, and he picked up the jazz feeling of it. I think he's created a whole new art form, and I'm very privileged to have been part of that.
To me, Beckett was one of the funniest writers who ever lived. To me, he's the Dante of our times. He touches the great issues, but he's a very sophisticated sense of humour. And I think that Endgame is one of the funniest plays of all time. But quite often Beckett is done very badly. You know, I hate saying this as an actor because it sounds like sour grapes, because I've been in my own fair share of bad productions too. But I mean, he is a very funny writer, and when you do him properly, when you get the right director and cast together, to my mind, it's the greatest acting experiences of my life and the greatest artistic experience of my life. I've been working on Beckett. It's so rewarding. He's touching on the essential themes of existence, and in a marvellously intelligent and very funny way.
Well, Mel Gussow used the word survivalist, and I think one thing that emerges from our conversation is the potency of Beckett's survival in all our imaginations. I'd like to thank everyone concerned. I'd like to thank Billy Whitelaw, I'd like to thank Barry McGovern, Mel Gussow and James Nelson. Thank you very much indeed.